whatever questions you have for any of them, this is your chance to ask them any legal questions or questions about their background that may be of interest to you. So please, fire away. And some of you panel members may have questions for the other people on the panel. Feel free to hop in there as well. Yes, Brother Cole. I'm sorry, Brother Stewardship. Yeah. Okay. Let me give it to Brother Rodenbush, who is our senior person who did the presenting on church governance.
I think you do have somewhat of an obligation, because what we're trying to accomplish here is preventative stuff. Because once there's a problem, it's too late. It's going to cost you, what do we think, 5-10 times more to fix a problem than to prevent a problem. So now, obviously, you got to be respectful, not listening in, horning in, or eavesdropping on conversations, but you figure out a way to bring the conversation back around, or at some point, or even, tell a war story or something that maybe incorporates that issue. But I think you probably, to try to help the kingdom, you'd want to make some sort of effort. If you hear something, and believe me, you hear a lot of stuff like that, whether it's, we don't need to do that, or we don't need to do this, and a lot of times, you can do whatever you want to, and just because your 5 pastor friends didn't get caught, or didn't get audited, or didn't get called out on it, doesn't mean that it's legal to do, and that you won't get audited, or you won't get caught, or someone won't call the Attorney General's office on your church and say, hey, they're not following state law guidelines in terms of an annual business meeting, or any other type of an issue that would come up regarding church governance, or any other issue for that matter.
Brother Butler, did you have a question?
Yeah, also for your last spoke after the presentation, the
Mm-hmm. There was something there. Yes. And what I was referring to was a situation where they have obviously been investigated, and there had been charges filed against them in court. In those type of situations, a very, very high percent of the time, 90+% of the time, there is something there. Now, it may not be as bad as what the allegations or the charges are, but usually 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, however you want to phrase it, there's an issue there of something. A lot of times I'll tell pastors or church leaders, either you're guilty of wrongdoing, or you're guilty of stupidity for the way you handled the situation, or you were doing what you're doing, and that can get you in trouble. But that is a distinction from someone being charged with a crime. And again, you're innocent until proven guilty, but just in my experience, that's kind of the way it plays out. There's a difference between that and someone who's just being accused of something. And in accusation cases, people get falsely accused all the time. And again, what we're trying to do is, obviously prevent the actual instances of child sexual abuse from happening in the church. But not only that, you want to prevent there being any cause for anyone to make an allegation, false, certainly not a true allegation, but certainly a false allegation, because a false allegation can do just as much damage to the church as it can, to whether the accusation is true or not. But now, obviously, for the victim, there's a huge difference between whether the allegations is true or not. but for the church and the reputation, a false accusation can do just as much damage.
Anybody else? Brother Boyd, I know that you've got questions about ICE since you are wanted.
We got all that worked out.
Okay. Have your clients ever told you that before?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The day before they go to detention. Anybody else? Brother Mike, how do we become one of those high net worth clients that you're looking for? Okay, good answer. And by the way, tithe or 10%, no matter what anybody says. It's not 20%, it's not 2%. Your pastor might want you to give an extra offering and you might have an extra deal, but tithe or 10%, and that's in the word and that doesn't change. Anyway, somebody else had a question. Really cool.
Follow up on this question, and it was briefly mentioned, the unlicensed practice of law.
Very bad.
It is.
Felony in the state of Florida.
So on that issue, so there's few apostolic attorneys and many pastors all over the United States that might call or ask or text you, build these relationships. You're not licensed in all 50 states. How do you decide whether to engage that minister, that pastor? And then do you have any qualms or functions about forming that attorney-client relationship inadvertently?
Let me start with Brother Mike, if you would, and then I'll come to you, JJ.
Well, I won't talk from the pastoral perspective. I'll just talk to estate planning clients. And this happens pretty regularly in my practice. I don't know for certain. I would say probably 60% of my clients are Colorado-based and probably 40% are nationwide. And how I have typically worked within our firm, we have offices not in every state, but many states. And the states where we do not have offices, we have attorneys licensed in there. So I will work with attorneys that have, if I have a client, like for example, I've got one in South Carolina. And so I'll work with, if we don't have someone in our office that's licensed there to review for state law compliance, because most of what I do is federally driven, but there are state law components that you have to meet those requirements. So I'll work with either someone within our office who's licensed there or local counsel to make sure we're in compliance.
And like the stuff you did for our seminars, just general.
Correct.
State stuff,
Federal.
it's not state specific.
Correct.
So you're not reviewing somebody's plan or telling them what to do.
Correct.
So you could give general advice to someone who's in another state.
Correct.
Brother JJ.
I refer everything to Cole Stewardship at headquarters. Now that I have his contact information, that way we can be vetted. No, in all seriousness, in general, it depends on the type of question. I mean, if it's criminal in nature, obviously we can give what my law professors would say the cocktail party answer, in that you would go through and hit the highlights and always refer them to local counsel to review anything. Transactions are a little different in that, you know, if it's articles of incorporation, stuff like that, even bylaws, you know, CPAs do a lot of that. And so, you know, I think that's probably a gray area, because I know, at least in Louisiana, CPAs will draft everything. And I've had in CPA firms, even consultants who are not attorneys, bring entire corporate packets, and notaries as well, because in Louisiana we're under the civil law system instead of the common law. So our notaries have the power to do all of those types of drafting. But I always refer them to local counsel. I mean, anything that I would say or do, because you don't know the other 49 states and their, I mean, it would be a nightmare, I would think, for someone to come to Louisiana from any other state and say, you know what, we ought to draft. It's probably 90% not going to work and just lead to trouble. So filter everything through a local counsel, at least refer them to local counsel at some point to review anything that you do.
Brother Gonzalez doesn't have to worry about that, since immigration's nationwide and he is licensed to do it and he can answer your immigration questions anywhere in the country. Other questions?
Tax stuff as well.
Yeah, national tax stuff is a nationwide deal. Other questions from our students? You guys have any questions?
I have a question, gentlemen. Basically, a question of how much money can my church donate to political candidates now?
Your church?
Yes, my church. Yeah. How do we get around that? How can we do that? That's a question that I get.
0.
Yes, that's the answer. But we quite, in donating to PACs and so on and so forth, that's a question that.
Yeah. The members of your church can donate, but the church itself cannot be involved politically.
There's, in all the history, this is, because when I was with Liberty Counsel, we dealt with these questions a lot. But in all the history of churches and donations, there's only been one church in the history that has ever lost their nonprofit status because they were involved in political campaigns or they were donating and that was a very unique situation where they took an ad out in the USA Today. They kind of painted a big target on themselves, church up in the Northeast. But so this big deal about trying to squelch churches from being involved in the political process has been a false narrative pretty much from the left to keep pastors in fear of saying anything. And so, Liberty Counsel and American Center for Law and Justice, they work a lot trying to just give out correct information, and so churches don't have to be fearful of that. But having said that, to your question, JJ, under the Trump administration, whatever restrictions were there before have been lifted. And so now they're basically saying churches have an open door to be involved in the political process, from speaking at the pulpit and from contributing. So I think there's probably never been an opportunity like there is right now for churches to be involved in the political process.
Anybody? Yes, sir. Rob.
Since all of you are involved in the ministry of some sort, how do you balance a call to the ministry or a call to God with also a call to the law or politics?
Well, let's start with Brother Gonzalez, and then we'll go to Brother Myers.
So that's a great question because, so I was telling Brother Mike that I pastor, we own a business. We have 2 daycares, large daycares, about 115 families that we deal with. We have the law firm. We have a school. And so all these things are really difficult to manage at one time. Brother Mike says, when do you sleep? And I try to take every other day to sleep. But you have to understand where your focus is and what's important. Our law firm started off as a ministry because the need was so great in our community, and now we had to separate the law firm from the church because obviously the liabilities and so forth, but it was also taking so much of my time and energy to deal with legal matters that we decided, hey, this needs to be its own separate entity and so forth and so forth. And I say that because a lot of times you in ministry lose your focus that ministry is what started everything else. And you have to be very vigilant in understanding that no matter what you do, that the kingdom first, right, and his righteousness. And then all these other things will be added onto you. So you have to be, you have to really focus from a practical matter. You have to really focus on what it's important and set aside time and energy and resources to that focus in your life.
That's a great question, Robbie. I'm in a little bit more of a unique situation. I was pastoring before I went to law school, pastoring this church, happy, doing good. And I felt a distinct call to go to law school. But it wasn't to be a lawyer. It was to benefit the ministry. I felt like we were going to need apostolic Pentecostals that could stand in the gap. At that time, there were, religious civil liberty constitutional groups, but they were Baptists and other. I felt like we were needing. And so I mean, I'm excited when I look around and see how many people now are getting legal education and how the UPC has just grown in all those years. But so when I started law school, I started with the whole notion of it being a part of my ministry, and it's opened so many doors. I got a chance to serve with my good friend Brother Jerry Jones and the Judicial Procedure Committee. Been able to help a lot of churches and pastors, and not only that, I feel like because law school, you know, it's more than anything, it teaches you how to think clearly and write clearly. And that's a big part of the ministry. So I saw a lot of, that book is all about the overlap between how the laws of our land are based on biblical principles and the moral authority that comes from Scripture. So to me, there was a lot of overlap. I didn't see it as a conflict. The only thing I saw is when I started, I never could charge people in the church, so I did everything pro bono. And there would be a line of people outside the door over here because everybody's got a legal issue of some sort. It may be landlord-tenant or what, but there's always something. And people found a free lawyer, and it was like, wow. And so that's where I started just referring everything out. And I was working in federal court because we were doing constitutional law. So, and I was with Liberty Counsel, so I didn't have to keep a state bar license. So I'd taken the Florida bar, passed it, but I just referred and stayed up underneath everybody else. That way, if it was somebody came with a family law issue, I could say, here's who you need to call. Here's who you need to call. So I'm so glad I met Brother Gonzalez, because now people are calling, what do we do with this immigration now? I'm like, here's who you need to call. That's a great freedom, you know, to be able to do that. But over the years, when I went to law school, I never had any idea there would be so many doors that opened. But I would encourage every apostolic young person that feels even an inkling. In fact, my son Luke is over there, and he's studying for his LSAT right now, and I'm excited about him going to law school in the fall of this year. But I feel like the Lord's raising up Josephs and Daniels and Esthers that are going to stand in the courts and stand in the, you know, the White House and be influencers. And he's called us for such a time as this. So sorry for the long answer.
Anybody else? Brother Jones, you have any questions of this illustrious group?
Well, not really. I do want to say, maybe Brother Vincent is what was said,
Scummy personal injury attorney, I think was the direct quote.
may be true until you need one. Like we did. You realize that the role the law plays.
Nobody likes lawyers till they need one.
Sometimes we feel, and sometimes it is, the law is too intrusive and regulations are too heavy. And there's no doubt of the truth of that. But when you recognize the opportunity it may give us to be there when people need us, and when we're there not just as an attorney, but as an apostolic, it opens doors. And I couldn't be, it's not really a question, it's a thank you to all of these here who have seen opportunity where maybe others didn't see it, and the personal sacrifices you've made to lead the way in the apostolic movement.
I'm sure you gentlemen have. I've had several consults that throughout the consult, I'm not one who puts Jesus on my walls or whatever, but through the consult, they felt something.
Yeah.
And I've been able to invite them to church, and they've come. We've had several families that have come because of just what they felt during a consult. And it wasn't something I brought up or said, hey, you need to go to church with me or whatever, but they feel something. And I've had a number of clients say, there's just something different about you. There's something different about this. I feel something when I come in here. And that's not me, that's God. And I'm sure that you guys have had those same experiences. And back on what you said, I tell people that every congressman and every lawyer is a crook except for mine. That's how people feel. They like to label everybody, but the guy I know, he's a good guy. Anybody else, please? That's what we're here for, to answer your questions that you might have.
Did we ever get the bathroom issue resolved with the, you were mentioning something about churches that are being targeted?
Yeah, so I got a call from Brother Gleason in Oregon. I think it's Gary Gleason's son now. It's actually Stan. He was named after his uncle, Stan Gleason, that we all know in Kansas City. But they called and they said, we've been targeted because groups are coming to the church, and they're like, we're the transgender restrooms. And they're not coming to church because they're wanting to be saved. They're coming because they're trying to find out which churches, are abiding by their laws and which ones are not. So he's like, what do we do? And so we started working through a facility use agreement, and then the people disappeared and they haven't heard anything. But he said it really kind of woke them up to the need to have a facility use agreement in place. And then I think, Stan, you mentioned something because you guys are building a new church in Bellevue. How do we label these restrooms?
Yeah, and Pastor was asking, and do we put male for biological, those born biologically as males, and do we put for women, those born biologically as women on the door signs? That was the question I think the architect had, and what do we need to do to address that?
Right.
And I know a lot of places will have a separate one-stall
Right.
family restroom that can accommodate anybody, no matter if they're confused or who they are. They can go use that non-gender restroom. But that was the question. Is there a way we can label those restrooms so we know that you have to be a biological female if you're going to use the female restroom?
Yeah, and I think there was a suggestion where you just say male, female, and under it in parentheses you put God-given gender, Or a fool cannot err therein, right? But yeah, you're right. There are a lot of they're doing those separate restrooms. Even there's some restaurants and establishments that are doing that. All the restrooms are all individual, and that works great for families because sometimes they got to change a child and the man has to take it. And so those types of private restrooms are probably good. They're safest and they kind of cover all those bases. But I really believe, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I really believe that if you have a facilities use policy, and as Rob was saying, you tie it back into your bylaws and say, here's what our policy is as a church, that, you have a right as a church to, it is a public space and that we've invited everybody, but you have a right to trespass people that come to church, that come and they're disruptive or there's some other issue. And the law enforcement will back you on that because it's different. It's not a city hall, it's a church. And so you have a right to establish what your facility use is. And whatever that is, you just put it in a policy, make sure it's an objective standard so that they can't accuse you of being arbitrary. And then you got to follow it, because if they can show you deviate from it, that's even more egregious. But, you correct me if I'm wrong, but regardless of what the school system is doing, churches can have a facility use policy in place that the courts will honor. That's my understanding.
And I think we're safe in Florida, and I think we're safe, especially where we are.
Like Oregon, what do you do if you're in Oregon?
Yeah, or what do we do if the government changes in 5 years, 6 years? Are we prepared for that? Right.
And going back to the trespass part, if someone is acting out in service, you always have the right to do it. In NAM churches, sometimes we do it from the pulpit and, tell our usher in the back, you just go ahead and call 911 now so that they can leave, especially when you have a congregation of 20. I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was testimony time. Having done that from the pulpit. But you have more authority than the media and society leads you to believe. And it's not to exert your power, it's to keep things in order. And we want to keep things in order in all of our churches. And that's why it's good to have a policy so we know what the order of operations are in our congregation, in our facility. Going back a few years ago, gay marriage. If you were renting out your facility, that was a sticky point at the time. And obviously we've gone through that and know that we only marry people who subscribe to our beliefs. But the other denominations in the town that I were in, they would open their facilities up to everyone because we love all. And I'd say we love all too, but we love them in a way that is biblically correct, according to Scripture.
You teach them a Bible study, pray for the Holy Ghost, it won't be an issue.
Till they want to come use your bathroom Sunday morning.
Any last question here for the group? Yes, sir, Brother Cole. Mr. Stewardship, I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr. Stewardship wants to talk about stewardship. As attorneys in local congregations, is there any place for the local attorney to help the church and the pastor pivot towards and help look for opportunities for charitable giving in the church, such as through testamentary instruments or bequests, and then the benefits, especially to maybe members of the church with high net worth or appreciated assets for that? Can anybody speak to experiences with that?
Well, it's up to the relationship with the pastor. I know our pastor has scheduled, sometimes on a midweek service, us to do a session, teaching session on estate planning, on living wills and HIPAA releases and all those kind of stuff. And you gentlemen can comment on that as well.
Churches have had me come and do like an estate planning seminar type thing for the church.
Yeah, and it kind of, in our church, it kind of falls under a small group ministry where we do divorce care, grief share, Dave Ramsey, financial peace, those types of things. Talk to church members, trying to educate them.
Good question.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, sure. You touched on, Brother Myers mentioned trespassing. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard about the situation with the church invasion in Minnesota, and Don Lemon and all that. And other than first an authoritative, I'm telling you to leave the property, what do we do after that besides wait for the police to show?
Sing louder.
I'm saying, can we physically remove those people?
I wouldn't suggest that. I don't think you're ever doing the right thing personally using physical force. I think you're always opening up a Pandora's box. Trespassing, it takes a couple of steps. It's not like you can immediately remove them, You have to notify law enforcement, then they come out. And so usually it's not an immediate thing, but it does serve notice to that individual, and you're doing it legally, so you have that weight. But I think a lot of it goes to like training, working with your usher staff. I don't know, maybe JJ, somebody referred to it over here about it's always better for these things to be handled outside of the pulpit. If you got like a head usher, if you got people that you can train that can kind of, your security team, and if they can be proactive and look at something that's building to a problem before it becomes a problem that takes the attention of the whole church, and they can kind of head things off. Like sometimes when we'll see somebody is kind of getting disruptive, they'll just go up and just sit down next to them, and that person immediately knows that, okay, there's some scrutiny here on my actions. So I think there's things you can do to kind of be proactive, but not in a way that requires any kind of physical force or touching, even putting your hand on somebody in an aggressive manner. It's always going to be a negative. It's a negative for your church, for your staff, for your. You want to look for ways to sort of move away from that and be, much more. Yeah. One of the things that we do here, and I know not every church can do this, but so we hire Palm Bay police officers that are off duty to help us with traffic out here, because I've been trying to get them to put a traffic light right here for 15 years and been unsuccessful. So we hire, and they come out here every Sunday morning, and they park their car, and they're out here to direct traffic, but you have to hire them, you have to pay for a minimum of 4 hours. So they're here for a minimum of 4 hours. And it helps to just have a police officer here in their presence. And so we pay them more than probably we need just to direct traffic out here when church gets out. But we also get the benefit of there being a police officer on campus, and he's in uniform, and that helps. And I know not everybody can do that, but those kind of things too, it helps you to build a relationship with your local law enforcement. And
Do chaplaincy, become a chaplain.
chaplain.
Involved with police chaplain, that they know you, then
Right.
you have to make that call. You're already, oh, yeah, that's Reverend so-and-so from such and such, you know, type of a thing.
See, they go the law enforcement route. Brother Gonzalez and I, as church planners, probably look at it in a little different light. What you do is you win the meanest, baddest bouncer in your town. You find out who that is. And I'm not in jest here. I mean, in 2 church plants, that's literally what we did. And it helps because they've already been trained of how to deal with people who are much more disruptive than typically in your normal church service. And that's kind of easier to do sometimes than get the police, for example, to come to church. Just to give you, being I am the scummy personal injury attorney, just to give you the other side of the coin, that there are alternate ways to enforce order
Brother
in our
Gonzalez
country.
would rather have a bouncer come than the police. His church doesn't want the police.
Well, exactly. That's why we want the bouncers. God delivers bouncers, and they come pre-trained, and they know how to sit next to you, and you know it's time to be quiet. They just have a look.
So, to tag into that comment as well from Brother Myers, you have to understand as well, if you see that video very carefully where Don Lemon went into that church, there was something that was said that was trained. And he said to the pastor, "Why are you pushing me?" And so he placed his arm on top of his shoulder. Obviously, he wasn't trying to assault him. He wasn't trying to create any negative situation there. But it's obvious that the person that was there, in this case, Don Lemon, was trained to say certain things and to act in a certain way that would lead to litigation later. And so you have to be very careful in creating or giving them ammunition to go against you in the church. So it's always best to make sure that you state the boundaries of their issue. You are now trespassing. Leave it to the authorities, and then create space between you and that person. Because again, you giving them ammunition by even putting your hand on his shoulder is going to create more problems than it will benefit you in the future.
Well, let's thank this panel. Give them a hand clap for their expertise. Thank you, gentlemen.